We'll talk further on the access and permissions. So we saw that we have profiles, and a few key pointers are we have standard and custom profiles. We have standard profiles and custom profiles, and then we have we have the scope of controlling the apps. What all do we control from profiles? We have the scope of controlling apps, tabs, objects, fields, and apart from this, some other permissions like general user permissions and the admin permissions. Okay, so all these things are controlled using profiles. That is what we have understood. Okay, now the next thing which is similar to profile is a permission set. Alright, so what we understand about profile is that we create a profile and then we assign that profile to multiple users. The reason why we create profile is we use a okay, that's right. Yeah, so the reason why we create profile is we can assign the same profile to multiple users, right? Reusability. So in that case, think of a scenario. Let's say all four of us, we work in the same team, okay, and we all have same profile. Okay. Now, out of all of us, if there is one person who needs a few extra permissions, got that thing? If one of us needs extra permissions, then what will you do? Will you create a new profile for that one user, or how will you manage that? Got my question? So out of 10 people who are using the same profile, one of the users needs an extra permission which is not there in his profile. So how do we tackle that situation? So one common thought that comes into mind is go ahead, create a new profile for that user. Okay, so that's a good solution, but the problem will be if you have more requirements like this, you will end up creating a lot of profiles which will ultimately again become difficult for you to manage, right? So out of 10 people, if there is one guy who needs one extra permission, there is another guy who needs another permission extra. So ultimately what will happen, you will end up having too many profiles, okay, and you will finally have a very complex system which you then do not want to do. So for that reason, there is this option of permission set. What is permission set? Permission set is again a set of permissions, okay, which can be given to a user in addition to the profile. Okay, so this is a set of permissions which can be given to the user in addition to the profiles. So let's say you have a certain profile, now you need one or two extra permissions which are not there in the profile. Those can be given to you with the help of a permission set. So this is more like an add-on package. Okay, so general permissions you get from your profile, plus there are certain add-ons which happen through permission set. Clear on this? So that's about our permission set. Now profile is must for every user. It's required. Permission set is optional. A user may or may not have permission set. Correct? But profile is something that is required for every user. So that is the thing. Now permission set, let's go ahead and see how do we create the permission set and how do we work on that. So here we are. Let's see. How this permission set works. So you will find permission sets exactly at the same place where we went for profiles. Go to setup, manage users, permission sets. Okay. In the permission set, you have to create a new permission set. You do not have any default permission sets. Okay. So by default, you do not have any permission set. No standard permission sets. You always have to create one. Create a new permission set. Give it a label and a name. Okay. Then click on save. So here is your permission set. Now whatever permissions you want to put in this permission set, you can put those permissions. Like let's say you want to put some app permissions or object permissions. So click on object settings. Okay. And then you scroll down or click on any object which you want to allow the permission on. Let's say account permissions you want to give. Okay. So click on accounts, click on edit, put account permissions here. So I give delete permission. So this permission set now holds the permission to delete, read and edit accounts. Okay. Now this permission set has this permission. This permission set can be given to a user who has a profile which does not allow him to do this. If this permission set is given, then he can do it. It's more like, understand this concept, pretty much similar to your mobile plans, right? You have a base plan and then you have a top-up plan or add-on plan which allows you to do some things. Maybe a plan for sending SMSs which is not included in your base plan, something like that, right? So nothing different from that. So this is just an add-on thing. You have to put those things here and put the permissions here in the permission set. Fine, and create the permission set. Now how this permission set is given to the user? You have to go to the user and go to the user to whom you want to give this permission set. Scroll down a little. You will have permission set assignment. So you can click on edit assignments and add that permission set. One user can have multiple permission sets. Okay. And when you feel that that user now, let's say this requirement for that user is a temporary requirement, he just needs it for 1 month. So after 1 month again you don't have to remove his profile or change profile, all those things. You just go ahead and remove the permission set from there. That's it. Got that in? So that ways this permission set makes life of the administrators a lot more easier. Okay, as compared to if they keep on creating new profiles and then managing those profiles, and then once they do not have that requirement anymore, then they again delete the profile, put the user back into the previous profile. That becomes a very complex thing. So we understand the permission set concept. So permission set is, as I said, it's more most of the times used for defining exceptions. Okay, so if there are certain requirements which are exception to the profile, then permission set comes there and it adds on to the permissions to the user. Okay. Now, so we have talked about all these things: apps, tabs, objects, fields, general users, admin, permissions. These permissions now we have talked and we understand. Now the next thing that we are going to talk is the data access. Let's say we all have a marketing user profile. Profile name is marketing user. Now this profile allows us to read, create, edit and delete accounts. So this profile has a read, create, edit and delete accounts permission. Okay, so we all are here. Now profile just says that you can read, create, edit, delete accounts. Okay, that is what your profile says. Now the other challenge that I have is that should every user get to see everyone's records? If I have a delete permission on account, should I be able to delete anyone's accounts or just my accounts? The ones that I own. Got that? And this is very important because sometimes you don't want people to delete others' accounts. You don't want them to even see others' data, right? So in that case, you have to define the sharing settings. How do you want to share the data within the users? Okay, so this is called sharing settings. In sharing settings, there are two things. Number one is organization wide default, and the second is, first one is organization wide default, second one is sharing rules. Okay, what is organization wide default? That's also called OWD. What is this OWD? OWD is basically a rule which is applicable throughout the organization. That is why it says organization wide default. So this is a rule for the entire organization, and you define in this rule whether an object is public or private. Okay, so what do we need to define here in OWD? We just need to define whether an object is public or private. What does this mean, public or private? If it is public, everyone will get to see all the data inside that object. Okay, for example, I say account is public. Then what will happen? Everyone who has access to see accounts will get to see all the accounts, all the records in the accounts table. If I say account is public, is private, then only the owner of the record will get to see his record. I will not get to see other person's record. The other guy will not get to see my records. Got it? So that is the concept of public or private, and this is applicable on the entire organization. Okay, so that is the reason why it's called OWD. So first thing that you have to do for sharing settings is you have to define whether the data is public or private, and that will be done using OWD. Okay. So if you make data public, then everyone will get to see everyone's data. If you have a very nice company and you feel that no, there is no problem, everyone looking into everyone's data, absolutely fine. If you have a company where people fight for accounts and then there are misunderstandings, confusions, people delete others' records, then you should make it private, right? And then in some cases, the data will be, the nature of the data will also be a factor, whether you have to make it public or private. Got it? Let's say, I mean, for that case, if I'm talking about an example of employee management system, let's say you have an employee management system, and then you have a table where you maintain the attendance of all the employees. So attendance is something which is fine. Everyone can see everyone's attendance. No one would mind it. Then there will be performance related information that can be stored in a table. Now this is the table which you would want to make it private. You don't want others to see what, how many, what kind of appraisal the other guy had, or salary related information which is stored in a table, that you will definitely want to make private. So that sort of thing. So depends on the way the company works, the process that they have, and depends on the nature of the data also. Correct? So where is this sharing setting thing? Under setup, you have security controls, and then you have sharing settings. So here is the organization wide default. First thing, under sharing settings, go to security control, go to sharing setting. Under sharing settings, the first thing that you see is organization wide defaults. See this? Now here we have all this objects listed, leads, account, contact, and you have the option of making them public or private. So OWD needs to be defined for each object. Alright. By default, some of them are public, some of them are private. That's fine. But you can make it, or you can change it for each object. Like for lead, if you want to make lead private. The moment you say leads are private, means only the lead owner will get to see that lead. Okay. If you make it public, everyone will get to see all the leads. Okay. And again, in public you have options. If you just make it public read only, others will only see the data. They cannot modify it. If you make it public read write, others who are not even the owners can see as well as edit the data. Right? So that is the thing. Clear? Okay. So we understand OWD. Tell me if there is an difficulty understanding OWD. Why we need to define OWD? How we define OWD? That is clear with everyone? So because sometimes you do not want everyone to see all the data, you have to do some settings for that. So the first one and the most simple one is the OWD, organization wide default, where you just have to come here and say whether the data is public or private. Now once you make this data public or private, this is going to be applicable on the entire organization. Okay, so everyone's data becomes private or everyone's data becomes public. Okay. Now, along with OWD, there is another concept which we need to understand. Allowing access to managers. Okay. So another concept is, do you want to allow your managers to see the data? Okay. So this concept, this question will not come if you are dealing, if you have made the data public. If leads are public, then do you have that question at all? Whether the manager should get to see the data or not? Because it's public, everyone can see it. Manager is no exception. He is also a part of the organization. He will also see it, right? This question comes if you have made it private, right? So this question comes if you have made the data private. It only comes if the data has been made private. That's correct. So whether the manager will have access to the data or not, this question comes only if the OWD setting is private. Alright. Now, the point is that if we want to give the access to the manager, if it is private and we want to give access to the manager, then how do we do that? It's pretty simple. Grant access using hierarchies. Okay. It's making the changes. Give me a minute. It will take a minute. Yeah. Click on edit. Grant access using hierarchies. Do you see this? So this is going to be important only if you make the data private. If you make it public, then there is no need of granting access. Okay. Because if the data is anyhow public, why do we need to grant special access to managers? So that is number one thing. Second thing, if you notice here, is that some of the objects are completely grayed out. You do not have an option of deselecting these. It's selected, checked, you cannot uncheck. Do you have an option? No. Okay. And these are all standard objects. Till price book, these are all standard objects. Now what does this mean? This means that for standard objects are the objects which have been provided by Salesforce, which means for standard objects you cannot restrict data visibility from manager. So that is not an option. By default, the manager has access and you do not have an option of removing the access from manager. So whatever be the case, if your data is in a standard object, your manager will always get to see that data. Your manager means any user's manager. My manager will get to see my data, and Shilpa's manager will get to see her data, right? And we do not have an option of removing that. So that cannot be done. Got it? So this is just a point that we can take out from what we see here. Just give me 1 minute. 1 minute. Hello. Yeah. Sorry. So we have understood this thing that for standard objects you cannot restrict data visibility from manager. Manager will always get to see the data of the subordinate. So that's one thing. However, if you are using a custom object, these are two custom objects, you have that option of removing the visibility from manager, which means the data can be made completely private. Only the owner will see, not even the manager. Okay. So if you have any such requirement, then you have to always use a custom object. If you have a requirement where you don't even want the manager to see the data, then you should always use a custom object. Fine. So that is just a point that I want to tell you, but overall understand this grant access using hierarchy concept. Okay. So clear on this thing, OWD, then OWD can be public or private. If it is private, if it is public, it's fine. Everyone is seeing the data. So no restrictions to anyone. If it is private, then the next question comes is, okay, it's private, but do the managers get to see the data of the subordinate so that they can control the process? That is the second thing. So that option also we have, which is grant access using hierarchies. Now the next thing that we have is sharing rules. Okay. Sometimes, so this is an organization wide rule, right? OWD. Don't you think sometimes there will be exceptions to this as well? Data is private, but I will be on leave for 2 weeks. I want one of my colleagues to see my data. In that case, how do we handle this case? Exceptions will be there, right? Sometimes you want someone to see your data because you will be on leave, or you just want him to help you on some project. Okay, that is where we will use sharing rules. Sharing rules are used for defining exceptions to OWD. Sharing rules are used for defining exceptions to OWD. So what do we need to define in a sharing rule? We just need to go ahead and define whose data needs to be shared and with whom you want to share. Again, the sharing rule will make sense only if the data is private. It will make sense only if the data is private. If it is public, then there is no concept of giving additional data access to anyone, because it's already public, right? So sharing rule will come into picture only if the data for an object is private and you want to share the data with someone who by default does not have access because the data has been made private. So let's see this, where the sharing rule thing is. If you just scroll down a little, you will find this: lead sharing, account sharing, opportunity sharing, case sharing. So you have a sharing rule for every object. Fine. Let's say you want someone to share someone's accounts. Share as in, if the data is private, still they should be able to see. Okay. Let's say for account sharing rule, go ahead and click on new, give it a name, sharing one, whatever, give it any name. Okay. Now whose data you want to share? Okay, let's say you want to share the data of director of channel sales. You want to share it with director of direct sales. Okay, so whose data you want to share and with whom you want to share this? Correct. Share this with this guy. Got it? So you have that option of customer support international's data needs to be shared with VP of marketing, whatever, based on role, or you can share the data based on public groups. Public group is in which you can put multiple users. Let's say all internal users. You have to share it with first group. Okay, so a group can, this public group can have multiple users, one or more than one users. Okay, so you have that option of creating public groups and share the data of one group with the other group, or you can share it by the roles, as I showed you earlier. Okay, and then you just need to go ahead and define what level of access you want to provide. Read only, read write, what level of access you want to provide on that. That is it. Done. Clear? Make sense? Sharing rule. So now what we understand from all this that we have discussed, that first thing that you have to do is OWD. Okay. Let's create a kind of a diagram here. I'll make it more simpler for you so that you do not get confused. See, there are a few concepts here. You might be thinking that there are too many things for you to understand here, but this is a very simple thing. First is your sharing settings. So in sharing setting, what all things you can do. So in sharing setting, first thing that you need to do. So first is whether you have that requirement of sharing settings or not, right? If you just want to keep everything public, then there is nothing better than that. No law and order, everything is public. Anyone can do anything. So don't even bother to do anything there. If your company says that, okay, everyone can see everyone's data and all that stuff. If there is a requirement of putting any restriction, first thing is OWD, organization wide default rules you will put. Okay, in that organization wide default you will have three options. One, okay, in organization wide default we are talking about making the data private or public, right? Okay, so OWD allows you to make the data public or private, right? If it is public, it's fine. Again, it doesn't matter. Now, if it is private, then there are three things. Completely private means only that user gets to see it. Visible to managers and visible to others who is not manager. Okay, others, anyone else who is not manager. So these two things, completely private and visible to managers, these two things should be controlled using our option of, what is that option? Grant access using hierarchy. This will also be done using grant access using hierarchy. However, if you want to make it visible to others, then you will have to use the sharing rules. See, this is a simple chart. Sharing settings, OWD, making the data public or private, If it is public, then you don't need to worry about anything. If it is private, then you have three options. You want to make it completely private, so grant access using hierarchies, you will have to go and uncheck those boxes. This thing is not possible for standard objects, that is what I told you. Visible to managers, this is by default there for standard objects. For custom objects, you can go and with this done through grant access using hierarchies. Visible to others, if you want to make the data visible to others who are not managers, who are not the direct in the in the straight hierarchy, then you can use sharing rules for this. Tell me if it's something which is difficult to understand, simple to understand. Questions on this? Got it? Give me a minute. So the only thing that you have to do is while you are working on a project or you are working on a client requirement, you just have to make sure that you understand this chart, or you understand this flow of things, and whenever you have a requirement, you just have to see what exactly needs to be done. In case there is any such requirement that you need to make a restrict access of data from some users, first thing you have to do is go to OWD, make it private. Till the time it's public, then no data will be restricted from anyone, so nothing can be done there. So first thing, go to OWD, make it private, then consider the other situations. Ask your client that, okay, when you say others should not see it, do you want the manager to see, or manager should also not see it? Grant access using hierarchies. Are there any exceptions? If that is there, then sharing rule. If that is not there, you are done with OWD itself. Okay, so if you have this diagram, it will help you resolve the things in few minutes. Sharing settings. Okay, got this? Clear on it? Let me know if you have any questions. We are fine, right? Okay. So sharing settings and all these things we have understood. Now there is one more concept that we need to understand. That some users, so we know OWD, we know sharing settings, okay? But there will be some users in the company who need access to all the data, like system administrator, like developer, like owner of the business. Fine. So these people need access to all the data. They do not want to rely on what the sharing setting says and what the OWD says. They just need access to all the data. Your system administrator, even if the data on account is private, so that private rule should not be applicable on system administrator, because he needs to see all the data. If he doesn't see the data, how will he manage things, right? So some users need to be kept out of this sharing setting thing. You understand that? Some people who need more permissions, they need to be kept out of all these sharing settings and everything. Why? Because they are into that kind of a role. For those users, you have to give them some additional permissions on the profile. Okay. What additional permission is required? I will show you. What additional permission is required, I will show you. Go to profiles. Take any of the profile. Or let me create a new profile for that matter. In the profile we have object permissions, right? Standard object and custom object permission, we have already seen this: read, create, edit, delete. Okay. In addition to these permissions, there are two more permissions: view all and modify all. You see this? And this is called data admin access. Okay. These accesses are the ones which are required by a user if he wants to see all the data. So anyone user whose profile allows him to view all data will get to see all the data in that object. If my profile says that for accounts I can view all, I will get to see all the accounts even if you make accounts private. Got it? And if you give me a modify all access, I will get to edit and delete all the data in accounts even if that is made private. Okay. So the users who have these permissions on their profile, they will not be affected by sharing settings. The sharing setting is not going to affect them anyhow. Right? So this is a more powerful permission. This allows them to see all the data, and modify all allows them to edit or delete all the data in that object. Okay. So no matter what OWD says, organization by default, or the sharing settings, these guys will always get to see all the data of that object. Make sense? So some users will be there, right? If you are defining a OWD and if you are making some data private, so in that case what will happen, this data that you have made private, some users still need access to all the data, like system administrator or the people who do the uploads, the data management team. If I cannot see the other person's data, how will I cleanse his data, or how will I run a report? Fine. Or how will I export the data? How will I take a backup? Right. If I am a support administrator or I am a data management based administrator, I need to manage the data for others also. If I don't see their data, how will I do that? So these kind of roles, they need access to all the data. They should not be included in that sharing settings concept. So that is where these profile permissions help. View all and modify all. Got it? So this is about our sharing settings. So in sharing settings, we have talked about organization by default, which is used for making the data in an object as public or private, and then we talked about whether we want to give access to the managers. For that we saw that there is an option grant access using hierarchies, and then we have this concept that we could see there, that for the standard objects you do not have an option of removing access from the managers, which means the manager will always get to see the data of the subordinate. And then we came to the sharing rule. Sharing rule is used for defining any exceptions, like if someone needs to see someone's data if it is private. So sharing rule comes into picture again if the data is private, right? Then we talked about the permissions which are required. Some people or some users who will need access to all the data, irrespective of what the sharing setting says. Okay, so that part we discussed on, and before discussing all these things we talked about permission sets. That's how permission sets are useful to define exceptions to the users. Got it? Tell me if you have any questions, doubts. Clear? No questions on this?